Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today I'm going to make a welding cart that's also a welding table. I picked up all the steel I needed from a local steel yard. Then I used a speed square to draw some 45-degree miters on several pieces of the square tubing. I'd recently gotten a new metal cutting bandsaw, so I used it to cut the 45s on one piece. I ground it down till it was exactly 45 degrees, and then I used that piece as a template for some of the other ones. I cut down 3 more pieces, 2 short ones for the ends and 2 long ones for the sides to make the bottom frame. This is the largest of the frames. Once I had them cut, I laid them in place and used some magnets to hold them together while I adjusted their angle. Again, I used the speed square to get them right at 90 degrees before tack welding them into place. I learned recently that you use a tack like this to hold the pieces in position, and once they're all connected, you go back and fill in the weld. If you don't tack these first and you just weld a line, the excess heat will end up warping the joint, and so you won't have a 90-degree corner like you started out with. I did a little bit of grinding to smooth those out, but not really make it pretty, and then I followed the exact same process for the top frame. It's a little bit smaller, but built the exact same way. I used the bandsaw to cut some straight cuts on some angle iron. These 4 pieces are going to be the uprights for the cart. I used the speed square again to hold these pieces perpendicular in both directions to the top frame before tacking them in place. I lined up the bottom frame and tacked it in place as well. I wanted to get everything connected before I went back and completed any of these welds. Then I went back and completed all the welds on all the joints. I did a little grinding to smooth these out, but I wasn't really that concerned with how it looked. I cut down 2 more pieces of square tubing to fit inside of my frames. These are going to act as supports on the bottom frame. One was a hair loose, so I just used a clamp to hold it flush with the bottom of the frame while welding it in place. I measured the space in between the uprights and then marked some miters on a smaller piece of angle iron. I used my frame as a workbench here and cut those pieces down. I cut 4 pieces down to make a frame that will act as a shelf. To hold these in place, I used some scrap angle iron from before to act as spacers. I could put this in the corner, set the pieces right on top of it, and tack them in place. Once I got all 4 pieces in place, I went back and joined everything with a good solid weld. For the table surface, instead of using a solid sheet of steel, I wanted to do strips, and the spaces in between these strips would allow me to use clamps to hold pieces down. For this, I cut down several pieces of 1x2. I put one up against the outer edge and tacked it in place. Then I used a piece of 1x1 as a spacer, and then put the next piece. I did this all the way across until I reached the other edge. The cart was getting pretty heavy when I flipped it over, so I lined up some heavy-duty casters in each one of the corners and tacked it in place. Each one of these can hold like 750 pounds, so they're plenty strong enough. Next up, electrical. All these pieces are for 20 amps. You have to make sure that these things can carry enough current if you're using a welder. I used a whip here, which is a metal conduit with the wires already in it. This pops right into a metal box, which makes it really easy to wire up a plug. I hooked the wires from the whip to one plug and then made some short wires to connect it to another. Now they're all running together and the entire box and both plugs are grounded. For these plugs to fit the cover that I got, I had to trim off these little tabs. They pop off pretty easily with a pair of pliers. Then they fit right in, and I used some screws to hold them into the cover before screwing the cover onto the box. The other end of the whip works the same way, but I have it going into a smaller box, and I also have an appliance plug going in. This is a 20 amp plug which connects directly to the other wires and goes in through a special connector. This connector clamps down on the wire so it won't be pulled back out of the box. So I connected each one of the colored wires with a wire nut and wrapped that connection with electrical tape. Once they were all taped up and secure, I shoved them into the box, then screwed down the connector and the cover. To make the shelves, I got some expanded metal grate. I just drew out the size I needed with a Sharpie and a straight edge, and then cut it with a cutoff wheel on my big grinder. I was really glad that I was wearing safety glasses while I was doing this because one of these cutoff wheels exploded and some of it hit me in the face. Be careful, wear eye protection. I used a smaller wheel to cut out a couple of sections, one on each side, to help it fit around the frame onto the bottom shelf. I cut down a smaller rectangle for the top shelf. With these pieces set in place, I just tacked all the way around them every 2 or 3 inches, and then on the cross pieces on the bottom. I figured out where I wanted the electrical plugs and then tacked that box on just in a couple of places to hold it in place. You can't weld the conduit, so I used some zip ties to hold it in place to get the final box where I wanted it and then tacked it on. Last was securing the tank. I found a scrap of chain and welded it onto the frame right next to where I wanted the tank to stay. I've had a piece of flat iron and I put it in a vise and then cut a slit down the middle of it and then in from the side. This gave me something to hang the chain on. So once I found out where I wanted that, I welded it on the front and the back to make sure that it was really secure because I didn't want the tank to fall off. And finally, it was time to load it up. I'll probably rearrange this as I use the cart more, but it's really nice to have all the tools plugged up and ready to go all the time. It's not terribly pretty, but it's gonna work and it's gonna be really handy to have. I want to thank SimpliSafe for sponsoring this video. They make a really simple, easy to use security system that anybody can install on their own in probably about 30 minutes. There's no installation fees or hidden contracts or any of that stuff. If you want to pay for 24/7 monitoring, it's $14.99 a month. You can cancel it at any time. And if you don't pay for the monitoring, you still can use the system as a local security system within your house. Like I said, it's really easy to set up and it comes with everything you need. There's tons of different sensors that they have. They have motion sensors and freeze sensors, water sensors in case you have an area that floods. There's carbon monoxide sensors and smoke detectors. You can hook the system up to your Nest, so when you arm it, it will tell your Nest that you're away. That's pretty cool. And all the sensors have a battery backup in them, and the base station is cellular based. So even if the power goes out in the house and something's wrong with the landlines, this thing can still talk to emergency services if you need to. They've got smartphone apps for Android and iOS, so you can control the system no matter where you are. And one of the coolest things is that since there is no wiring, everything is wireless. If you move, you can take the entire system with you. It's a great product. I would definitely suggest it. Be sure to go check them out at simplysafe.com. Tell them Bob sent you. There were a few reasons I wanted to do this project. One, I wanted a good welding work surface. Something that was already grounded that I could just set pieces on, weld them together, and be done. I also just wanted a cart so I could have the welder and the tank and all these tools in one place so I could get to them quickly and as I needed them. I didn't have to pull them out of the closet. But as I got started doing this project, I actually felt like I was becoming a worse welder. I mean, the welds were awful and I could not figure out why. Well, I figured out later on that at some point I had turned off the gas tank, or maybe just never turned it on in the first place. And since this isn't something I do very often, I didn't think to double check it. Without the gas, the welder has a much harder time creating a good weld, and that was the problem all along. So near the end of the project, I turned that on and it was immediately a better welder. So learn from my mistake there. If you do some welding, be sure to check to make sure that the gas is on if you're using shielding gas. As I use the cart, I'm sure I'll add things to it and modify things just to make it a little bit more useful. One thing I know that I didn't add that I need to is some sort of a hook to hold this thing. I will also probably put some sort of a storage, something to hold some small hand tools like some files, some wire brushes, things like that that I'm gonna need on a pretty regular basis. That's it for this one, guys. I'd love to know what you think about this project. You can let me know in the comments below or at ILikeToMakeStuff.com. If you have suggestions for welding carts, leave those in the comments as well because it could help somebody in the future who goes to build one. I am gonna have a set of plans available for this cart in case you want to get all the measurements to make something like this for yourself. You can get those right here on my website. And I've got lots of other videos of all different types that you might be interested in, so be sure to check those out. If you want to see what I'm up to in between these projects, be sure to follow me on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. And don't forget, I am now live streaming from my shop at least once a week on Twitch. I'm gonna put a link to that down in the description. I would love for you to come hang out with me and chat with me while I'm working in the shop. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.